Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Faithful Movements, the Role of Faith in Social Justice webinar. We're really excited to have you all on today to have this really important conversation with our esteemed panelists, who I'm excited to introduce you to. First, we'll go over just some brief housekeeping. My name is Ben. I'm a field associate here at NCRP. If you have any questions today about the technology, you can message me by just using the chat feature. It'll either be in the upper right or bottom right hand corner, depending on your setup. It looks like a speech bubble. Our presenters will also be using video today. So if you can't see it, just click on the participant's icon and their video should pop up. Also, throughout the day today, we'll be asking for your questions. So make sure you send those to me. You can use the Q&A feature that looks like a question mark, or the chat feature, really, and we'll make sure those questions get directed to them. Some upcoming events at NCRP you may want to be aware of. We released our report this week, a Philanthropy assessment of the New York Community Trust, which we're excited about. Also on May 3rd will be our 2016 Impact Awards, where we spotlight foundations that are really in the top tier for funding social justice and equity. We'll also be doing a webinar in June that we're excited about in partnership with funders for LGBTQ issues on diverse trans leadership. And we'll also be having another new report in June, doing an assessment of the Oregon Community Foundation. So lots to look forward to. We'll be doing an in-depth bio for each of our presenters later in the session. But we're excited to have Shireen Zaman on from Security and Rights Collaboratives at the Proteus Fund. Also Abby Levine, Director of the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. Lauren Spokane, Fund Development Coordinator at the PICO National Network, and Janae Isler, who will be moderating the conversation today. She's the Field Director at NCRP. Today, we encourage you to engage with us on social media. We have folks on Twitter, and we're excited to interact with you and your questions. The hashtag for today is Faith and Social Justice. And here are just a handful of the hashtags our presenters will have today. Those will be highlighted throughout the slides, but we wanted you to know that they're on as well. So we'll do a quick poll to kick things off. Then Janae will talk about why we chose this topic to delve into today. And then we'll hand things over to our panelists and really get into a discussion with them and with you all, and then close things out. So to get things started, to make sure that you all are in fact awake, we're going to start a few polls to see who is on the call. Go ahead and mark which answer best represents you: a funder, a nonprofit, a lay community member. You've got about 45 seconds to fill that out. Just a few seconds left. Great. So it looks like 62% of people are nonprofit interested in this topic, 28% are funders, and 8% are lay community members. Thank you so much. And one more question for you all. This says, how much does faith or do faith communities play a role in your organization's work? Again, you've got about a minute to fill that out. Just a few more seconds. Great. So 61% said to a great extent, faith and faith communities play a role in their work. 26% said somewhat, 8% said very little, and 3% said not at all. Great. And with that, I will hand things over to Janae and to our panelists.
Hello, everyone. Ben, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Great. Firstly, before I jump in, I'd like to first just apologize if there's any background noise. I'm actually traveling at a conference and I'm in a hotel that is doing some construction. So if you hear any banging, the ceiling's not falling in on me, but I can't necessarily control it. I'm very happy to be moderating this webinar today for NCRP and with our exceptional panelists. And I wanted to provide a little bit of context for why we chose this topic. So it's no secret that NCRP is committed to social justice, and we can advance social justice practices better in our society if we understand what motivates people to act around that, and in particular what values motivate people to act. I first learned this very personally as a faith-based community organizer. When I was in my early 20s, I organized in Florida and in Ohio. And until that time, I hadn't really considered the power that people's faith-based values had in their lives, and again, particularly around acting for change, whether that be personal change in their individual lives or societal change. So I met some amazing people in both places that had overcome grave challenges, drug addiction, poverty, many other things, primarily because of the strength and the encouragement provided by their faith traditions. And there were many institutional faith bodies, so churches and Islamic communities and Jewish communities and others who had really worked together with all of the people that they serve to collectively create change for their communities. As I've gotten older and grown in my career, I've seen that repeated over and over, particularly in social justice circles. And I've also seen it in my own life. I always knew that I had faith values. I was raised Roman Catholic and still am. And I always knew that I had a commitment to social justice. But it wasn't until I was an adult and well into my career that I really reflected on how those two things, seemingly separate things, are actually aligned, and how the values and the beliefs from both of those areas from my life work together to create who I am and motivate me to do the work that I do at NCRP and elsewhere. So why are we doing this webinar today? Unfortunately, in general discourse, I think that many of us do keep our faith life separate from our social justice life if you prescribe to those two values. I've been increasingly in conversations and even have done some recent panel discussions and presentations at conferences in which we talk about why social justice folks aren't talking about faith. And again, not only our personal faith, but why we're not talking about the powerful role that faith communities are playing in advancing the issues that we care about. So this webinar is to explore a little more deeply how powerful faith communities can be in helping us achieve more justice in our society, and also to bring the conversation a little bit into the light so that it's not sort of individual conversations on the side, but really thinking strategically about how we can leverage the power of faith communities and also the influence that our own faith traditions have on our work so that we can be more effective and more collaborative in our society. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce our first speaker from the PICO National Network. So Ben mentioned Lauren Spokane will be speaking from PICO, and she works in the DC office as its Fund Development Coordinator. Lauren started her career in Boston as a community organizer with the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization and the Union for Reform Judaism. So she then moved to Seattle and joined the fundraising field at the University of Washington, and was also a Giving Project participant and board member of the Social Justice Fund Northwest. So Lauren is going to share a bit more about PICO and her passions, but she shared with us that she's very passionate about helping people translate their skills as organizers into fundraising in order to resource social justice. So Lauren, please share with us who PICO is and the work that you do, and also how faith and faith communities play a role in your work.
Great. Thank you so much, Janae, and thanks for everyone for being on this call. It's I share with Janae the feeling that this is a topic near and dear to my heart. It was really through my connecting my passion for social justice to my my tradition as a Jew that I really found my place in social justice movements, and found the nurturing that I needed to really grow in that world. So quickly about PICO, we are now, next year will be our 45th anniversary, a community organizing network that is now the largest faith-based organizing network in the country. We have 45 affiliates in 21 states, and PICO National really works to support the development of each of those local organizing groups, and then help them leverage the power that they build in their towns and cities to have influence also at the state level and at the national level. And we work to equip people of faith and those who are most impacted by injustice to make change at those levels. And the two strands that run through all of our work are race and faith. Now our focus on race is a bit more recent. It's in the past number of years that we really made a network-wide commitment to put race at the center of all of what we do. But faith really has been a part of PICO from its onset. We were founded by a Catholic priest and continue to have several clergy on our national staff and in senior leadership, and put a lot of effort into organizing clergy and the lay leaders in their congregations. So my co-panelists and I, as we were prepping for this webinar, thought it might be helpful to think about this question of what role faith plays in our organization's work through a story. So one example I'll share, and we'll have time to share more later. Some of you, if any of you are in California, you probably know that in the fall, California passed a really historic anti-racial profiling bill, AB 953. I hope I'm getting that number right. And PICO, California was a part of a broad coalition that was advancing this legislation to have a real impact on transparency in policing so that we could combat racial profiling. And in the fall, gathered 1,000 folks at the state capitol, helped to pass this legislation through the assembly, and then it was up to the governor to sign or veto. And our folks in California were told that it would take an act of God to get the governor to sign this bill. That was the word we heard from one of the staffers. And PICO California gathered faith leaders from across denominations. Across our network, we represent, I think someone estimated over 60 denominations, and did a 24-hour vigil at the state capitol, and had everything from a Catholic mass to a Bible study to a Shabbat service, and gathered our masses from the faith community to say this is a moral issue, and we won't stand for continued racial profiling, and we need to have structures in place to combat it. And a week later, the governor signed the bill. So that's just one illustration, one window into how we mobilize the faith community and mobilize everyday people to draw from their faith commitments and dig deep into the kind of world that they want to live in, the kind of community they want to live in, and then act on that to make change.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Just so everyone is clear, we'll have time for a question and answer session at the after each of the panelists shares a little bit about their work. So please do hold your questions. You can type them in the question and answer box or chat the host, and we'll make sure that we get those into the discussion. So next, actually before we move on from PICO, I do want to acknowledge that PICO is an NCRP member, a nonprofit organization member of ours, and so we're very thankful that they were able to represent NCRP membership, and very happy to have you on the call. So next we're going to look at the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable with Abby Levine. Abby is the first director of the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable, which is a network of 52 Jewish organizations pursuing social justice from a Jewish perspective. Under her leadership, the Roundtable has doubled in size, supported sector-wide campaigns on civic engagement and immigration, and organized a conference of over 130 people across the network. This roundtable is a natural consensus builder, and Abby has led a coalition of 30 local progressive organizations in Ohio with America Votes. Before this, she was the founding San Francisco staff person for Progressive Jewish Alliance, which is now known as Bend the Arc, a Jewish partnership for justice. And many of you may have heard of Bend the Arc. She came to the roundtable after 3 years of fundraising experience with DC Vote, which works for congressional representation for district residents. She was named a 2014 Woman to Watch by The Forward and received an Abraham Joshua Heschel Award from Jews United for Justice in 2013. Abby's bachelor's degree is from Yale University, and she lives in DC with her husband and 2 small children, Zachary and Lila. So Abby, we welcome you, and we're very interested to hear about the work of the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes we can.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you all for joining this really exciting conversation. As mentioned, the Roundtable is a network of now over 50 organizations working on social, economic, and racial justice issues from a Jewish perspective. So there's national and international groups like Bend the Arc, American Jewish World Service, National Council of Jewish Women, and others. Some of the logos are here, as well as local groups like Jewish Community Action in Minnesota. We work to build the capacity of our organizations and raise the visibility of our field broadly. And so one way that the Jewish faith unites all of us is around our holidays. And actually this Friday night is the start of what I think is the Jewish social justice field's favorite holiday, hands down, Passover, because of its themes of freedom and liberation. And it's not just our favorite. Passover is actually the most widely celebrated Jewish holiday. A 2012 survey found that 68% of all American Jews participate in a Passover Seder. So I invite you to consider for a second why that is. Give you a second to think to yourself. In part, I think it's because Passover is celebrated in the home, and so it's super accessible. But I think it's also because, it's not the only Jewish holiday that's celebrated in the home, so that can't be the whole answer. The other reason, I think, is that the Exodus story and taking that first step out of oppression toward a better place, toward freedom, is universally inspiring. And as I'm sure all of you can know better than I, countless leaders have been inspired by this story of the Jewish people leaving bondage in Egypt. Those whose names we know, like Martin Luther King, and a special shout out to Harriet Tubman, who was just announced is going to be on the $20 bill, which makes today a really exciting day. So people whose names we know have been inspired by the Exodus story, and then those whose names we never will know, whose everyday acts of kindness and resistance fuel social change. And so this story, our story, has become a cornerstone of modern social justice work. And Passover is a holiday when we tell and retell our story. We ask 4 questions, we remember that we were strangers, and are commanded to remember that we were strangers and work for inclusiveness and freedom for all. So we're using this hashtag, Act on Passover, to unite all of our work and raise the visibility of this fabulous Jewish holiday. And it has been true, it is true now, and it will continue to be true that Jewish communities seize the opportunity of Passover to talk about modern plagues, to ask 4 questions for today, and there's countless resources that have been created and are being created, as well as events that are going on across the country. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. Again, everyone, if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. So our third and final panelist is Shireen Zaman. And Shireen, sorry, I'm switching windows here. Shireen is with the Security and Rights Collaborative at the Proteus Fund. She's the program director there and works with foundations and individual donors to restore and protect civil rights that have been compromised in the name of national security. She has led organizational transformation, resource development, and program management at several nationally recognized nonprofits. Most recently, she was the executive director at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, and prior to that, served as the Middle East director at Vital Voices Global Partnership. Shireen is a 2016 Truman National Security Fellow, and in 2013 was recognized as a White House Champion of Change. So Shireen, we are looking forward to hearing about the Security and Rights Collaborative and the exciting work that you have been doing at the Proteus Fund.
Great. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thank you all again for joining, and thanks to NCRP for inviting me to join this discussion. So as Janae mentioned, the Security and Rights Collaborative is a grant-making donor collaborative, and our strategy is really around combating anti-Muslim profiling, hate crimes, and discrimination. But we know that this issue is one that impacts a broad set of communities that are sort of perceived to be Muslim and thus labeled as suspect in sort of this post-9/11 and current ISIS moment. So that includes South Asians, who can be Christian, Sikh, Hindu, non-Muslim Arabs, and then sort of the diverse set of ethnicities of Muslims in the U.S. Our focus is on supporting the leadership and visibility of Masa communities and supporting partnership and collaboration between Masa communities, which we use to stand for Muslim, Arab, and South Asian, along with broader immigrant and communities of color, because our communities very much understand that they are not the first to face these challenges, and that they very much need to work in partnership to build both the power, visibility, and sort of accountability on these issues. So we do this in a couple of different ways. We identify opportunities and make catalytic grants to support and develop leadership in Masa communities. We provide flexible, responsive resources through our Rapid Response and Convening Fund. And we also work to change the narrative by building both the visibility of Masa communities, but also holding media and public officials accountable through our communications hub. And in addition to all of that, we work to organize philanthropy around these issues and really educate and align funding in this space. And you know, I think there's so many stories I could tell about sort of the impact this work has had, but I think specifically sort of thinking about the role that faith and the power that really sort of a multi-faith effort can have in our work. I'll just share one. So back in October of 2012, a man named Wade Michael Page, a member of a white supremacist group, fatally shot 6 Sikh Americans at a temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And within hours of that shooting, our network of grantees and allies was immediately activated. And the very first sort of narratives that were emerging in the media was that this was a case of mistaken identity. This person was probably trying to target Muslims. And instead of communities responding in that frame, so saying, okay, we need better education around faith communities in this country so people can know the difference between Sikhs and Muslims, as though it would have been okay to attack Muslims, there was a pivotal point where the communities and the leadership and sort of the networks that SRC had helped to support over the years really said, look, we need to stand against bigotry and violence against all communities. And so there was a message, the messaging and the work was around inclusivity, pluralism, and the frame that the groups chose to go with was not that we are not Muslim, but that we are all Sikh. So this message of solidarity and standing with the Sikh community, no matter what your faith was, but really standing against bigotry and hate against all of our communities. And I just thought that was a really powerful example of how faith can play into, but also work to counter some of the stereotypes and hate that we're seeing in our communities right now. So I'll stop there and share more about our work throughout the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shireen. And as everyone on the webinar will see, we've left a lot of time for discussion and question and answer, and we already have some questions, so I encourage you to continue to send them over. So I want to start, before we jump into some of the questions that have been submitted, I think that we need to do a little bit of framing because it's related to the questions. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists to briefly share some thoughts about the dominant narratives that are seen about the faith tradition that you prescribe to or that you predominantly work with, and how does that affect your work? So why don't we start again with Lauren speaking first, and then go to Abby and Shireen.
So, you know, as I said, we're multi-faith. So PICO works with many different denominations, and each denomination faces their own narratives that are in the public about who they are and what they represent. Of course, our Muslim brothers and sisters in our organization have particularly been faced with narratives that misrepresent their communities and their faith, and so we've done some work around solidarity between faith communities. We put out a letter from our white evangelical leaders to express solidarity. But what I really want to touch on is the fact that faith as an idea, as a whole, has really been hijacked as associated with conservative ideology. And so sometimes when I tell people, oh, I'm Lauren, I work for a faith-based community organizing network, and sometimes people kind of look at me funny and try to suss out if I'm some right-wing activist. And just in using the word faith, that has developed a certain cultural resonance that is associated with conservatism rather than progressive social justice, a progressive social justice agenda. So a big part of what PICO tries to do, and I think does in the communities where it works, and what we're doing at the national level, is really reclaiming faith as a voice and a constituency for social justice that's seen that way, which is really what our clergy and lay leaders consider to be their true calling as people of faith and the most authentic interpretation of their sacred texts. So I'll stop there. I'm interested to hear what my co-panelists have to say about this as well. But I would certainly say that countering those dominant narratives about the role of faith in public life is a big part of what we do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lauren. And your answer touched on one of the questions that came in through the Q&A. So I'm going to read the question in case Abby or Shireen wants to touch on it in your responses. So the question is actually about how would you describe the added value that faith brings to organizing and advocacy to a person who's skeptical about the role of faith in social change. So again, speaking about the dominant narrative on your, about your faith tradition or the groups you work with, and how might you describe the value to someone who's skeptical? So Abby, why don't we hear from you?
Great. So I would say amen to everything that Lauren just said. And I would add that there is unfortunately a dominant narrative in our country about Jewish Americans that often plays into stereotypes of Jews being wealthy and having control over finances and the media. We've seen that even more clearly in the hate-filled public narrative around the election over the last several months. And I believe that our Jewish social justice field interrupts that narrative through our simple existence in a way that is entirely authentic. Judaism holds values of justice, community, hearing and caring for the other as core to our theology. And our 52 organizations mobilize thousands of American Jews to move past their privilege and take action for civil rights, economic and racial justice, global justice, and much more. And so by doing that in public ways, we make it clear that American Jews acting from religious values are prioritizing the overall health and rights of our entire society for all people. And again, like, this is an authentic piece, I think, of our community. There's a poll that said that 56% of Jews say that being Jewish means working for justice. Some people say that we attach a Jewish text to the issue of the day in order to justify this work, which is just simply, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but not true. And so polls in our tradition proves that justice is a central tenet of Judaism and of American Jewish identity. And I think in terms of, just to sort of directly address that question that you posed, Janae, about what's added to the conversation, I think are some of the stories, like the Exodus story and others. And also I found that in connecting our the justice issues of the day to our faith and to our religion, there's a way that it gets heard differently by the person that you're talking to, and can sometimes, though not always, move past the sort of bickering and partisanship and polarization that makes issues get stuck. So that's what I would say.
Great, thanks. Shireen, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. So as my co-panelists already mentioned, it is definitely a challenging time to be Muslim or to be perceived as such in America. You know, I think we all probably have an understanding of the dominant narrative, including that's being promoted by those who are running for presidential office, is one of suspicion and threat. And I think, unfortunately, a number of our current government's policies like surveillance and profiling, the operation of the prison at Guantanamo Bay, drone strikes, et cetera, all serve to sort of further this foreign and othering of our communities, although Muslims have been a part of the American society since its very beginning. A number of slaves that came to this country were Muslim and have created a strong tradition of the African American Muslim community in this country. And I think, so you know, we only have to look at the news headlines to see what real impact this sort of dominant narrative has on members of our community. Just this past week and in the last few weeks, American Muslim and Arab airline passengers have been kicked off airplanes for simply speaking Arabic or wearing hijab or sort of appearing to be suspicious. And I think this points to a lot of challenges. I mean, one is this very visceral and real fear that people face that, again, is being sort of reinforced by people running for political office or the dominant media and popular media narrative. I think it also points to sort of a lack of clear policy of how, institutions like the airline should respond. But I think the other challenge is that, it really also points to sort of this public anxiety and uncertainty of what to do. So in fact, I think most of those cases, none of the fellow passengers stood up for the Muslim that was being targeted and profiled. And so I think that speaks to a broader challenge of how do we address sort of a cultural and societal narrative about our communities when, in fact, very few people personally know a Muslim, right? So the data shows that only 1 out of 6 Americans know a Muslim personally, but for those who do, they have a much higher sort of a perception of, or a positive perception of Muslim communities. So I think the other, sort of challenge in that is, again, the anxiety and bullying that we are seeing increasing in this environment, and actually the chilling effect that we see on sort of civic engagement, speech, and religious expression. In terms of the institutions and even the grantees that we work with, there is a constant sort of rapid response posture as opposed to the idea of really building institutions and investing in long-term sustainability. But I think the good news is, one, I mean, not only my co-panelists, but so many other communities are really standing with and standing up for communities that have been targeted in this environment. And I think the support that we've been able to provide to our amazing sort of field of grantees is resulting in, real tools of agency. So having, a very visible and eloquent American Muslim colleague of mine appear on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, having American Muslims represented in Congress, the development of the first online organizing platform for the Muslim community this year. So I think we're making a lot of great strides in moving from sort of fear to understanding. And I think really partnering with other faith and allied communities is going to be an increasingly important part of that conversation.
Excellent. It's like you guys are reading my mind and the mind of the participants, because you hit on the next question that I was going to ask.
Well, I'm happy to help.
Just want to remind folks who are watching to tweet at NCRP. The hashtag is faith and justice. So any takeaways you've heard so far, and as we continue the conversation, please engage with us on Twitter. So the next question touches on something that Lauren spoke about because of the nature of Chico's work, but I'm curious what you, Shireen, and Abby have to say about engaging in interfaith coalitions and also engaging with folks of no faith tradition who care about social justice in order to advance the goals of the communities that you work with. So either Shireen or Abby can answer first.
Go ahead. Okay. So maybe I'll just share this sort of builds on the point that I was just making about the importance of building allies and coalitions in this work. Just again, not to hark too much on the political climate, but it's real. And so, about a month ago, actually, we're just coming up on the 1-month anniversary of the attacks that happened in Brussels. And unfortunately, some of our political operatives took that incident to try and take advantage of it to score some political points. And one even suggested that Muslim neighborhoods in the U.S. should be patrolled and surveilled. And I think one of the most important and powerful pushback to that idea came from actually the New York Police Department commissioner, who said not only is that offensive, but it's actually ineffective. But what maybe not everyone realizes is that statement was the result of sort of months and years of hard work and organizing on the ground by New York communities that included, yes, a significant Muslim and Arab contingency, but also homeless advocates and LGBTQ advocates and leadership in the Black community, who all work together to, pass significant policies around curtailing the use of surveillance by the NYPD, but also holding the NYPD accountable for some of the practices that they had been doing. And so it was sort of all of this work over these years, again, by a multi-faith, multi-ethnic, cross-collaborative coalition that really led to this very important win for Arab and Muslim communities in New York, but I would say for many, many communities in New York that's still sort of being implemented and followed up today. So that very important and I think visible leadership of the NYPD Police Commissioner was a result of so much work that we were happy to support, and many others of our funder colleagues were supported as well. So I think those types of examples of how do we bring really diverse coalitions together to fight for social justice based on our common and shared interests, but also really learning, again, from the moral perspective, how do we stand for each other in a way that's really powerful and deep.
So Abby, before you jump in, we're wonderfully getting a lot of questions, so I want to kind of stack them and build on them. So if you could tailor your response slightly from a different perspective. So if a secular organization wanted to partner with your organization or other faith-based groups, what are some suggestions on how they might initiate that partnership and form that coalition as opposed to the other way around?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I think I just want to say that key to all of this is the relationship building and the understanding and the work and understanding that it takes on all of our part to understand what it means to be an ally for those of us who work as allies. We spend a lot of time talking about that in our network, is like, what is it, how to build coalitions, like what you need to do in order to show up at the table as a good partner. And I think that as simple as that question is, it's a very complex answer and one that changes in different contexts. So I think just running through all of that is just that understanding and that work and that discussion, particularly as times change and things happen. I want to say that all of our organizations work in coalition with interfaith groups and secular groups based on issues, based on geography. As like a couple quick examples, Jewish Community Action in Minnesota works with the PICO affiliate, Isaiah, on issues like payday lending. At the national level, there's obviously relationships between the Reform Movement and PICO as the denomination, as an individual synagogues. And then on like unique issues like fighting anti-Muslim bias and Islamophobia, I'm proud to say that a lot of our Jewish organizations in the Roundtable have been in relationship for years with Muslim organizations and have been speaking out and in partnership with those organizations. And I think the only other thing I would add in terms of that particular question is to just sort of be thoughtful, and that hopefully the partnership doesn't come out of nowhere, right? That it comes out of a relationship of like mutual understanding of where the other person is coming from and acknowledging the differences, both as challenges and as strengths.
Great, thanks. So, Lauren, yep.
I was just going to add something quickly to that.
Yep.
That I think there's a dynamic to be careful of. I second everything that Abby said, and just to affirm it, or amplify it, there's a dynamic where movements, there's kind of a rent-a-collar dynamic where we have a protest and we want to strengthen it with a moral faith voice, so we bring in a priest or we bring in a rabbi and put them on the agenda. And I think there are many clergy who've had the experience. There are many clergy who do that all the time, and you know, take it with a grain of salt, whatever. Those are powerful moments, but there are also many clergy who have had the experience of working with organizers and feeling like faith is being used as a tool and as a, you know, a means to an end without really acknowledging and understanding the authenticity of and the depth of their faith commitments as being a central part of who they are and how they view the world, and not just a mechanism for us to achieve a particular end.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And I have a question that I'd like for you to start off by answering, but of course, Abby, Shireen, if you all want to jump in, feel free. We have a very specific question about the South, and specifically how to mobilize Christian pastors in the rural South to participate in social justice issues around African American males. And so with PICO being a national network, interfaith, multi-denomination, I'm wondering if you have any experience with that, Lauren, or if you have any anecdotes about successful work in that arena.
Sure. I think that's, you know, I'll share what I have to say on that. There's a lot more that I think I don't have the background to speak on. So PICO has affiliates in New Orleans, in Florida, in Texas, which is a newer organization. And we've had, for a number of years, an organization in Birmingham that we're currently expanding to a statewide organization. So those are the main places where we're working in the South. And it certainly has its own challenges and its own dynamics, and something I think that everyone's trying to really figure out. I think part of the answer is probably connected to what I just said a few minutes ago, which is that I suspect I myself haven't worked in the South. Janae, you may be able to speak to this more so from your experience, that they're more than maybe in other places, authentically relating to people, particularly clergy, around their faith as a primary driver and a primary world view and lens is going to be is incredibly important, and that clergy are not going to do anything that isn't coming out of the way they interpret their sacred text, the way they see their calling by God. So that's it. Yep. That's the bit that I'd share on that.
Great.
And I'll also say that one of the things that we're doing in the South right now is we actually hired someone who used to be the director in Minnesota, Phyllis Hill, she's from the South and wanted to get back home, and she is now serving as our regional organizer on our Live Free campaign on criminal justice reform, and she's spending 4 months. She just finished, I think, her 4 months living in New Orleans. Now she's moving to Alabama, and she's kind of taking a tour around the South to really figure out our organizing strategy in the South.
Great, thanks. So we had a couple questions come in around challenges, and particularly challenges of building coalitions. So I'll throw out both of them, and any of you can respond to either one of the questions. So the first question is around coalitions across socioeconomic class. It seems as though because faith transcends socioeconomic class, there's an opportunity to build that kind of coalition, and the person was wondering if you have any successes or challenges in building that cross-class coalition but using faith as an anchor. And then the second question is around the challenges of building interfaith coalitions. So beyond interdenominational, you know, within, say, the Christian tradition or within the Jewish tradition, but specifically interfaith coalitions, what are the challenges and how have you overcome them? So for the sake of time, I'll ask that 2 or 3 of you each only answer one of those questions, so choose wisely. Who wants to go first?
Shireen, you go first.
Thanks. I'm going to take the challenges in sort of the interfaith context, or the challenges and opportunities there. So I guess I would reframe it to say, in our work, we again have focused on Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities, and you know, for those who know sort of global politics a bit, you can imagine that the idea of you know, Christian and Muslim Arabs working together on a campaign, sort of in many other places other than America, or Hindus and Muslims working together on a social justice campaign in any place other than America, would be very unique. But somehow in this work, and maybe, you know, because all of our communities have been lumped into sort of one suspect category, we've really been able to support and build authentic relationships and really find, you know, I mean, the example I gave about the Sikh community in Wisconsin is a great one, and there's so many of them where we are just finding that our brothers and sisters in our communities are really standing together and really connected and advocating at the table in a way that is, you know, almost it is as though my Sikh colleague at, you know, another foundation is representing exactly what I would say at that meeting. So I feel very confident that my voice is being heard through him, which is a pretty amazing thing to say. And I think that, again, in very few other places or moments or movements maybe would we be able to say that those types of relationships and that really deep solidarity has been built. So I think in our world, you know, the ability, I think, you know, speaking as a funder, to not only ask, to sort of expect that kind of work, but to actually fund and support the time it takes to build relationships. I mean, one of the unique things that we did is actually resource a shared communications hub that helps to develop shared messaging and talking points that can be used for a broad set of groups coming from many different angles. And so that kind of shared common resources that we can provide has really helped to move that coalition building and relationship building along. So I think, again, it's one about relationships, and two, for those of us who are funders, about thinking of creative ways to support those relationships with real tangible resources. And I think our communications hub is a great example of that.
Great. So those who asked the question about funding, take note of that answer, and funders on the call, take note of that answer. So, Abby, you look like you want to jump in. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'll take on the other question about organizing across class. So I think one thing that's really exciting about this work is some of the economic justice organizing that's gone on in the Jewish social justice world. So a number of our groups have that as the core to what they do around increasing minimum wage issues like the Fight for 15, which Ben the Arc is a part of, or like the legislation around paid family leave with a group like Jews United for Justice based in DC. And I think one thing that we found, just to be like super honest about it, is that what some of these groups have been able to do is show up in these broader coalitions as one of the maybe few largely white, largely upper middle class member or organization or constituent organizations. Not to say all Jews are white and wealthy, because we know that's not true. And what sometimes happens when we're hitting a good day is that the Jewish community can help bring other white communities or other allied communities along. And so that's like what we hope for. Maybe I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're running short on time. So I want to get to some of the questions that we've had about fundraising so that we don't neglect that. A couple of people have asked about how to communicate with funders about the benefits of faith-based work. So we've been talking about you know, how powerful it can be, interfaith coalitions, secular coalitions with faith coalitions. We talked about values. But at the end of the day, fewer and fewer funders want to fund faith-based work. So do any of you have suggestions about how to help nonprofits who do faith-based work communicate that to funders, or even just a message to funders about the importance of that work? So Lauren, we haven't heard your voice in a while. I'll kick it back to you, and then we'll come back to Shireen and Abby.
Sure. There's a couple of things I would say in response to that question. I feel a caveat coming up, which is that part of the challenge in relating to funders, I don't know that this is specific to relationships around faith-based organizing or faith work, translates for funders' interests as a member structured. So all that I said before about through safe language and out of safe text and not talking about safe as a tool and as a strategy. In some ways, you have to put that aside a little bit to actually explain the political significance of bringing in faith communities. And a place where I think we try to straddle those pieces is to explain the importance that we see in having moral clarity to win. And this is a phrase I've heard from my colleagues and really sticks with me, is that it's not just enough to have a good political analysis. We need that. And it's not just enough to do really good organizing of our constituencies, but kind of the glue that holds that together and that helps to drive the urgency of some of our coalition work is the moral claims that come from speaking from a faith lens. And our closest funding partners who have really seen the value in PICO see that as part of the value add that we bring to social justice movements.
Thanks. Thanks. Shireen, Abby, did you want to add anything to that answer?
Sure, this is Shireen. So I might just build a little bit, I think, on what Lauren said. And so I would say, like, we at the Security and Rights Collaborative are not a faith-based funder, right? So our funder partners are from a variety of you know, both institutional funders, individual donors, and come and sort of support our work for very different reasons. And I'll just share one example based on a recent conversation that I had. So one of our funders, sort of to Lauren's point, funds our work through sort of a criminal justice reform, racial justice lens. And he explained to me that their ultimate goal is reforming criminal justice, but understand that national security and the tools created in the name of national security are being used very broadly and are used as sort of exceptions to the rule. So if you're looking for transformative and comprehensive reform, you actually have to address anti-Muslim bias in policy in order to close those loopholes and create really comprehensive criminal justice reform. And I think that is sort of an example of how you use your aim, sort of your moral reasoning, but to fit into sort of the priorities and policy agenda of perhaps funders or partners alike, I would say.
Great. So we're getting low on time. We only have 3 minutes left. So I want to help to wind us down. Before I do, if for some reason your question didn't get answered, please again tweet at NCRP, use hashtag NCRPchat or hashtag faith and justice. And I'm sure that NCRP staff and also our panelists can go on Twitter a little later and respond to those questions. But for our closing thoughts, I'd like to ask each of our panelists, starting with Abby, to share how would you like to see faith communities step up more for social justice? How would you like to see faith communities step up more? And if everyone can keep their answer to a minute or less, that would be ideal. So Abby, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah, so I think two things. One is to think more about how we show up as allies in this work, and to be more thoughtful before we come to a conversation or to a partnership. I just think that's, at the end of the day, the thing that's going to make all of this work easier and more powerful, because none of us can do it alone. There's too much work to be done. We need all hands on deck, and so it's really about how we build those relationships and how we partner. And then the last thing I just want to say is, like, I've just been thinking a lot about the shoulders that we stand on in this work, and maybe I'm just being affected by the news about Harriet Tubman today, but I don't know that it answers the question exactly, but I just wanted to say that I think keeping that in mind and remembering where all of this came from and the shoulders that we stand on will help all of us in this work.
Great. Shireen?
Sure. So Again, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Abby said, and I think especially for the American Muslim community, this is something I feel like I didn't get in my religious education, but there are very deep social justice values within Islam that I think we really need to lift up and make more visible and make that part of our community's religious education, because there is where I think we can build those authentic relationships and partnerships with other faith communities that are seeking social justice. And I think in that vein, being very deliberate about lifting up the diversity of American Muslim leadership. As I said, it's the most diverse faith community in America, and yet we would probably not know that by sort of the faces that are lifted up most often.
Great, thank you. Lauren?
I want to close with a question that my colleagues who work closely with clergy have begun to ask in their clergy organizing work, which gets at really a core part of their mission to help clergy and their congregations get out of complacency and to take risks and consider the ways that our own faith institutions actually perpetuate dominant narratives about the hierarchy of human value around race and other lines. So this question is, are you a chaplain to the empire or a prophet for the resistance? And I think if we all ask ourselves that question and our faith communities ask themselves that question, we might be surprised and stirred up by the answer.
Excellent. Thank you to all three of you, Lauren, Abby, and Shireen. Again, let's continue this conversation on Twitter. And we have one last slide. It's a resource slide. It'll take 15 seconds. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ben to go over some steps for further conversation. Ben?
Hi, everyone. To those of you who have asked, yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website and NCRP's YouTube channel within a week of today. In the meantime, yes, please continue the conversation on Twitter with all these amazing panelists and with us. And here are a few resources. These slides will also be sent out to all of you who RSVP'd for today. But our panelists' own websites, the SRC, the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable, PICO, have some great resources on everything from folks who are doing great funding for this work to some great history and other reports. So these are all linked in the slides that will be sent out, and they're also available just by Googling. And then lastly, one of our partners, Sojourner, who does great work around faith, they're having an annual gathering of leaders committed to changing the world through faith and justice in June here in DC. And Janae will be presenting there in a session with Abby. So that's another chance to continue the conversation. So with that, we are really thankful for all of you coming on today and to all of our panelists. This is a fantastic conversation, and we know it won't end here. So please keep this conversation going with your partners, with your neighbors, with us. And we hope to see you for our next webinar. Make sure you fill out the feedback survey that will open up as soon as you close so we can make sure to keep improving our webinars to meet your needs. Until then, a huge thank you, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.